Good morning again. David Creel with your encouragement for the day. Have you ever had a boss or a situation where you thought that you had no other options? We're going to learn about one of those situations today. Daniel chapter 3. King Nebuchadnezzar made a gold statue 90 feet tall and 9 foot wide and set it up on the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. Babylon is modern day Iraq. I'm 99.99% certain. Then he sent messages to the high officers, officials, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the provincial officials to come to the dedication to the statue he had set up. King Nebuchadnezzar invites everyone, says, "You got to come." So all these officials came and stood before the statue King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Then a herald shouted out, "People of all races and nations and languages, listen to the king's command. When you hear the sound of the horn, flute, the musical instruments, bow to the ground to worship King Nebuchadnezzar's gold statue." Now, if you're a believer, you're to bow to no one. Even in mocking, like, you say, "Oh, we're not worthy, no, you're not supposed to do that. No good." Okay? Anyone who refuses to obey will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace. So they will be fired, literally, if they don't bow. So the sound of the musical instruments, all the people, whatever the race or nation or language, bow to the ground and worship the gold statue that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. But some of the astrologers went to the king and informed him of the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "Long live the king. You issued a decree requiring all the people to bow down and worship the gold statue when they hear the sound of the horn, flute, lyre, and all the musical instruments. That decree also states that those who refuse to obey must be thrown into a blazing furnace. Literally fired. But there are some Jews, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, whom you've put in charge of the province of Babylon. They pay no attention to you, your majesty. They refuse to serve your gods and do not worship the gold statue you have set up." So they get called because everyone else is coming too. He says, when you hear the music, bow, and they don't. Knowing that the blazing furnace that's the king's order. Then Nebuchadnezzar flew into a rage and ordered that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be brought before him. When they were brought before him, Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you refuse to serve my gods or to worship the gold statue I have set up? I will give you one more chance to bow down and worship the statue I have made when you hear the sound of the musical instruments. But if you refuse, you will be thrown immediately into the blazing furnace. And then what God will be able to rescue you from my power?" Now, this is a critical point here. He said bow. Obviously, we don't have King Nebuchadnezzar over us, but again, it could be your boss or circumstances or, whatever. Okay, let's say he's your boss. King Nebuchadnezzar is your boss, and he or she tell you, you can't do whatever, pending it's, obviously within the rules. So what do you do then? verse 16. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied. You get the impression like the king says this, and they're standing there, and then one of them steps up and says this right here. Like immediately. They didn't have to go back think about it. They didn't have to do nothing. They said, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God whom we serve is able to save us. He will rescue us from your power, your majesty. But even if he doesn't, we want to make it clear to you, your majesty, that we will never serve your gods or worship the gold statue you have set up. Nebuchadnezzar says, bow. They say, no, we're good here. Our God's able to rescue us. And if he doesn't, we're still not going to bow. So are you possibly facing a situation like that where they're saying you can't do this, this, this? Maybe it's time to take a stand. See what happens. Nebuchadnezzar was so furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego that his face became distorted with rage. He commanded the furnace heated 7 times hotter than usual. Then he ordered some of the strongest men of his army to bind Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So they tied them up and threw them into the furnace, fully dressed in their pants, turbans, robes, and other garments. And because the king, in his anger, had demanded such a hot fire in the furnace, the flames killed the soldiers as they threw the 3 men in. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, securely tied, fell into the roaring flames. But, there's that word again, but suddenly Nebuchadnezzar jumped in amazement and exclaimed to his advisors, didn't we tie up 3 men and throw them into the furnace? Yes, your majesty, we certainly did. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, 3 people. Look, Nebuchadnezzar shouted, I see 4 men, unbound, walking around in the fire, unharmed, and the 4th looks like a god. Then Nebuchadnezzar came as close as he could to the door of the flaming furnace and shouted, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Then the high officers, officials, governors, and advisors crowded around them and saw that the fire had not touched them. Not a hair on their heads was singed, and their clothing was not scorched. They didn't even smell of smoke. The only thing that burned up were the stuff that Babylon owned. The soldiers, or the officers who threw them in, they died, and they were thrown in bound, and then they were walking around in the fire. So the ropes they used were also burned up, but they weren't. So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego stepped out of the fire. Okay, then Nebuchadnezzar said, praise to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. He sent his angel to rescue his servants who trusted in him. They defied the king's commands and were willing to die rather than serve the God and serve and worship any God except their own. I make this decree, everyone should worship the God. Basically, everyone should worship the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So, maybe it's time you need to face the fire at whatever your circumstance you're going through. Your boss has a word, but they don't have the final word. Okay, that belongs to God. And by God, I mean Jesus. So, maybe it's time to get uncomfortable. Something to think about today. Just remember, everything in life is a choice. Absolutely everything, and this is not debatable. This is a crude example, but it works. Even if you have a gun to your head, you can still choose the bullet. Okay, so I hope this was encouragement to you today, and we'll see if we can see you tomorrow. Have a great one.